Well, Augustine now comes to his college years. He studies rhetoric in Carthage, a city that is familiar to us through our reading of Virgil's Aeneid. North Africa is now part of the Roman Empire. Augustine himself is a native North African. It is a province now of Rome. The Romans had destroyed Carthage, razed it to the ground, but they rebuilt it, and now it is a bustling port city. And like a lot of port towns, it is kind of wild. So when you think of Augustine in Carthage, don't think of going to school in Waco, which may not be the most exciting city in the United States. Think of Carthage more like a cross between New Orleans and Las Vegas. It was a pretty wild place. And his description of it kind of draws us to that fact. Opening of book 3, I came to Carthage, where a cauldron of illicit loves leapt and boiled about me. And then he goes on to describe his own relationship to these illicit loves. I was not yet in love, but I was in love with love, and from the very depth of my need, hated myself for not more keenly feeling the need. I sought some object to love, since I was thus in love with loving, and I hated security and a life with no snares for my feet. So he's not really in love with a person. He's in love with love. Have you met people like that? And have you experienced that yourself in your own life? A kind of romanticism, but a narcissistic romanticism. People who are hopeless romantics are usually quite bad lovers, in the true sense of that word. They do not truly love the other human being. What they love is the experience of being in love. They love the feeling of love. But to love the feeling of love is to love love, not this person. And real love is loving this person, warts and all. So there's something kind of egotistical about being in love with love. It's a kind of emotional titillation. And you love it so much, and this is a sign that it really is kind of a weird thing. You love it so much that you even love the breakups. You even love when things don't go the way they should go, because it's all part of this high drama, this roller coaster that you're living. So there's something kind of disordered, emotionally disordered about being in love with love. Very common feeling, human experience, by the way. But it also ties into the next thing he mentions in book 3, his passion for stage plays. These two things are very similar. The enjoyment of tragedy on the stage and the enjoyment of this kind of fake love. How is it that a man wants to be made sad by the sight of tragic sufferings that he could not bear in his own person? Yet the spectator does want to feel sorrow, and it is actually his feeling of sorrow that he enjoys. Just like you enjoy the heartbreak of being in love with love, you enjoy the sorrow of grieving over these fictitious characters on the stage. Why do you go to see sad movies? Movies that you know are going to be depressing, that do not end well? You see the advertisements, a story of two lovers tragically separated, and you bring your box of Kleenex to the theater, and if you're not made as sad as you were hoping, you're disappointed. What's up with that? Or if sad movies aren't your thing, why do you go see horror movies? What is it about seeing things on stage or on the screen that you would hate if they actually happened in your real life? It's enjoyable somehow when the character opens the door of his closet and there's an axe murderer. Were that to happen in your life, you wouldn't enjoy it as much. So why? Why do we go to these movies? Why do we see these shows that should be distressing experiences? It points, Augustine is suggesting, to something emotionally unhealthy about us. We go to these shows because basically it affords a certain release. When discussing tragedy, Aristotle speaks of the experience of seeing a tragedy as a catharsis, a release. And that can be kind of a good thing, but note the important point. You wouldn't need to have a release if there wasn't something that was pent up. Catharsis only happens when there's a sickness that needs addressing. Catharsis is letting the pus out of a wound, but without really healing the wound. It ameliorates some of the symptoms, but it does not heal the wound. So we go to these things because they make us feel better, but they don't actually make us better. They just simply relieve some of our symptoms. So this is the kind of state that Augustine is in when he is in college. And he stays in that state until something remarkable happens. He reads a book. He reads a book by Cicero called the Hortensius. And speaking of a true tragedy, it is tragic that this book has not survived. We have snippets of it, but we do not have a complete manuscript of this very influential work on Augustine. Augustine's teachers had assigned this book so that he would learn stylistic pointers. Cicero was a great philosopher who introduced, in a sense, classical philosophy into Rome. He lived about a generation before Virgil. But he was also a great orator. And so Augustine's teachers of rhetoric wanted Augustine to read Cicero and pay attention to the style. But Augustine did not. He paid attention to the substance, and the substance blew him away. What he realized was that there actually was a third option for becoming happy. The option of pursuing the truth. Before, he thought there were only two options. To become happy, I should either maximize my pleasure or pursue as much power and glory as I possibly can. Think of this in terms of Plato's 3 parts of the soul. So, satisfy my appetites, satisfy my thumos. But now, Cicero's pointing out, no, satisfy your mind. To pursue truth and to attain truth is the highest high that a human being can experience. The love of wisdom is the most satisfying life that you could possibly have. Augustine is convinced, and he vows to become a lover of wisdom from that point forward. And with this new zeal, he decides to give his mother's religion another look. He's been brought up by a Christian mother, but he's always thought Christianity was sort of déclassé. You know, this is something that less educated are interested in. But he thought, hey, I'm a lover of wisdom. I'm going to have an open mind. Let's see what the Bible has to offer. So the first thing he does is he turns to the Bible. And boy, is he disappointed. Why is he so disappointed? Part of it has to do with the fact that the Latin translations of the Bible were not particularly eloquent. But I think there's a deeper reason as well. Augustine is used to a very, very high style of oratory. When you read the works of Cicero or other Latin rhetoricians, you realize that they were extremely sophisticated. I mean, a single paragraph could be just one sentence with all these elaborate subordinate clauses and whatnot.
So he's used to that, and he thinks of that as sort of the gold standard. Now he goes to the very seemingly simplistic grammar and syntax of the Bible. See Adam created, see Adam fall, see Adam expelled. And he thinks, this is kids' stuff. These are like children's stories. And so he rejects it. Note the irony. He was supposed to pay attention to the style of Cicero, but instead he paid attention to the substance, and something good happened. Now he's supposed to get something out of the substance of the Bible, but he's repulsed by its style, and he gets nothing out of it. He's a hypocrite, but so are we all. Augustine thought that he was rejecting the Bible for its low style, but as he later reflects, it was the Bible that was rejecting him. The Bible is deliberately written in a very humble manner in order to rebuff the proud. The pride come thinking they're smarter than the Bible, and then they look at this and they think, oh, this is nonsense, and they push it away and do not learn anything from the Bible. The Bible has kept its secrets from the proud. It is only when you enter into the spirit of reading with genuine humility and modesty that you can hope to learn anything. And that's not just true of the Bible, that's true of other works as well. You get nowhere with your pride. It's only when you are willing to accept the possibility that what I'm reading has something to teach me that you can actually learn. So Augustine compares the Bible to a building, a church, with a very low entrance. You have to bend the neck. You have to bow down in humility in order to pass through the entrance. But then you get in through the other side and you look, and it's a Gothic cathedral. The ceiling is high and the space is flooded with luminous lights from the stained glass. That is the Bible. But he was too proud at the time to know that, and so instead he turns to a third group, the Manichaeans. And notice that they seem to be the best of both worlds. He really likes the high style of Cicero. The one thing he found missing from Cicero was that his writings did not include the saving name of Christ. That's kind of an unfair criticism for an author who wrote in 43 BC, but Augustine's point is that he had been brought up in a household that revered the name of Christ, and so he kind of missed it. So he turns to the Bible, which has the name of Christ, but doesn't have the high style. The Manichaeans seem to be the best of both worlds. They do talk about the saving name of Christ. They do include his name, but they also are very sophisticated. They have a very high style, and this is very attractive to Augustine. They also say that they can provide rational proofs for everything that they believe. Well, that sounds really good too if you are this newfound lover of wisdom. Is not the whole point to move from opinion to knowledge, to know things according to their causes? So he falls in with the Manichaeans, which he later deeply regrets. The Manichaeans were a very odd group. They were their own religion, even though they liberally incorporated aspects of other religions onto their own. For example, the founder of the Manichaeans, Mani, was a fellow from Persia, and what he claimed was that just as Jesus Christ is the second person of the Holy Trinity who becomes incarnate, he, Mani, was the third person of the Holy Trinity who becomes incarnate. In other words, he taught that he was the Holy Spirit incarnate. They had a lot of other beliefs as well, but there are two main things you need to know about the Manichaeans. Number one is that they were dualists. I'll say dualism. They had a dualistic understanding of the structure of reality. They believed that all reality consisted of two equally opposed forces, a good force and a bad force, that were constantly at war with one another. Now, if you hear that, you might think to yourself, well, isn't that Christianity? Doesn't Christianity and basically every other religion understand reality to consist of a conflict between good and evil? Yes, a conflict, but note the language, two equal and opposing forces, forever colliding against each other. A sort of yin and yang of the universe. That is actually not Christian teaching at all. For one thing, there's nothing equal about the fight between good and evil. God, according to Christianity, is all good and all powerful. Evil is not. What evil is something Augustine's going to have to figure out later. But Christianity does not have a dualistic outlook, even though unfortunately a lot of Christians do kind of think dualistically. But when you actually look at the doctrine, the teaching, you realize, no, this is something quite different from dualism. I'll give an example of this. Here's an interesting trivia question. What is the opposite of the devil in Christian thought? It is not God. God has no opposites because God is everything, and the opposite of God is nothing. It's not God, it's not even Jesus. Because again, Jesus is God. The opposite of the devil is Saint Michael. Because the opposite of a fallen angel who has been defeated and sent to hell is a non-fallen angel who defeated him and sent him to hell. So the opposite of a creature is a creature. The opposite of a creature is not the creator. The creator has no parallel, is beyond comparison. So Christianity is not dualistic, but Manichaeanism was absolutely dualistic. They believed in two different principles of existence, spirit and matter. And spirit was the realm of the good, and matter was the realm of evil. Which incidentally is another difference from Christianity, because Christianity teaches that matter is good. It is good because it was created by an all-good God. The second significant feature of the Manichaeans is that they were materialists. That is to say, they understood all reality as some kind of material substance. Now, they would be the first to vigorously protest what I just said. They would say, we're not materialists. Didn't you just hear that we believe in spirit and matter? We distinguish between the two, and that spirit is good and matter is evil. How dare you call us materialists? Well, here's the thing. When you then go on to ask them, okay, fine, what do you mean by spirit? What's your definition? Every explanation they gave, Augustine found, was materialist. That is to say, they kept thinking of spirit as some kind of matter. Well, matter is, the ocean, and spirit is just like mist that hovers above the ocean. Well, mist is matter too. Well, it's like a wind. No, well, that's actually a material thing as well. When you really push them on it, they really could not understand a difference between spirit and matter. They basically reduced all spiritual entities to a kind of materialist form of thinking. And so, they were not exactly what Augustine hoped they would be. And yet, it would take him a very, very long time for him to figure this out. One other thing about Manichaeanism before we move on, it may seem like this is a really stupid religion. And how could Augustine have subscribed to such a stupid religion. For example, did you catch the thing about the figs? The Manichaean elders, they had this kind of two-tiered system. There were the juniors and the elders. The Manichaean elders would never dare hurt a fly. Even plants they refused to hurt, but they needed to eat. So they would let the Manichaean juniors hurt the plants by plucking figs from the fig tree. And then one of Augustine's jobs was to serve figs on a tray to the Manichaean elders. And because of their dualism, the Manichaeans believed that there was this fundamental fight between a good God and a bad God. And in this fight, divine shards broke off from the good God and settled in lumps of matter. And that, for example, is the human being. The human being has these divine shards, but his body is a lump of evil matter. But other things have this as well, like figs. And so figs were said to have had an unusually high concentration of this unusual divine shards. And that the Manichaean elders' holy digestive system would unleash these divine particles and liberate them. You think, well, my gosh, this is just ridiculous. But here's the thing to remember. Dualism and materialism are recurring temptations for human beings. Manichaeanism eventually died out in the 5th century. Some people say a little longer. It went east for a while. But the point is, the name may have died out, but the ideology or that way of thinking occurs again and again and again throughout history. And it's with us very much so today. In popular culture, you see lots of traces of Manichaeanism in Star Wars. Now, it's not all Manichaean because George Lucas took a lot of different stuff, threw it in a blender, and turned on the switch. But the force, the conflict between a good force and a bad force, and even this whole business with the figs, it's like the midi-chlorians. I think that's the name for them in Star Wars. That, if a particular human being has a high concentration of these midi-chlorians, he becomes or she becomes a conduit of the Force, right? But becomes eligible to be a Jedi. That is a totally Manichaean way of thinking about things, a very materialist way of thinking about the divine. Manichaeanism also is basically Scientology, or Scientology is Manichaeanism. Scientology is a dualistic religion that has very similar features to Manichaeanism. And I've also been told that Mormonism has some strong Manichaean elements, particularly a kind of dualism between Jesus and the devil that does not exist in Christianity. But that's outside my bailiwick. I'm not certain. But the point is, it's very easy to think like a Manichaean. And in some respects, you might be thinking like a Manichaean right now. Well, Augustine has graduated from college with his degree in rhetoric, so to speak, and he remains in order to teach rhetoric. He is now becoming a professor of rhetoric. He's kind of becoming, in other words, Thrasymachus. He's learning to use his words to climb the ladder of success by being very, very clever. And he's doing well in his career. Remember, he vowed to become a lover of wisdom ever since he read Cicero's Hortensius at the age of 19. But he's not a pure lover of wisdom. He has become quite fond of the pleasures of the flesh. And so it is around this time that he takes a mistress and has an illegitimate child with her. He does remain faithful to that one woman for a period of 14 years. But it is clearly an irregular relationship. His career is doing well. He has a big contest, a speaking contest that he's about to enter into. He's waiting to go up the stage. when a soothsayer, kind of almost like a witch doctor, comes up to him and says, hey, if you want to win, give me some money and I'll do some special sacrifices for you to assure your victory. And Augustine pretty much figures out that this guy is going to slaughter several animals and offer them up. And he's disgusted with this, and he rejects this sort of crude voodoo and says, of course I don't want to do something so foul. Augustine is sophisticated. He's well educated. He's part of the Roman elite. He's a yuppie who is climbing the ladder of success. But what he later realizes is that in his own way, he was every bit as superstitious and as proud as that soothsayer. For there is more than one way to sacrifice to the fallen angels, Augustine ominously says. So, yeah, sacrificing animals to what end up being demons is bad, but there are other ways of sacrificing to demons. Pride makes your life a sacrifice to demons, so to speak. So he's not in a particularly good way. The central content of Book 4 is the death of his dear friend. Augustine had this friend since boyhood. They grew up together. They were from the same hometown together. And when Augustine moved, the friend moved just to be closer to Augustine. That's how close their friendship was. Have you noticed how important friendships are to Augustine? Every book of the Confessions has a discussion about friendship or a mention of close friends. Well, these two were thick as thieves. You could kind of tell from the way Augustine describes it that in this particular friendship, Augustine was more of the alpha. He was more of the leader. Oftentimes in friendships, there is one who leads and one who follows. Not necessarily anything wrong with that. But the friend was used to being a bit of a follower, literally and metaphorically. Well, the friend gets sick, and he goes into a coma, and his family, like Augustine's family, is Christian. They're worried he is going to die without sanctifying grace. And so while he is unconscious, they baptize him. Remember, baptism in some respects is a pre-volitional cure for a pre-volitional disease. So your will does not have to be consciously active in order for the grace to take effect. Well, he wakes up, and Augustine is there, and Augustine says, oh, I'm so glad you're feeling better. Oh, by the way, while you were unconscious, your family baptized you. Isn't that funny? Ha, ha, ha. He's expecting the friend to follow his lead in making fun of these sort of primitive practices. But instead, Augustine says, with a startling burst of independence I had not seen in him before, my friend said to me, you stop talking like that, and if you continue to make fun of this, our friendship is over. Wow. Augustine is so used to that vicious cycle of friendship unfriendly, like was described in Book 2. He's not expecting this guy who's usually a follower to suddenly be someone who is independent. This is the first time he has seen the vicious cycle of friendship unfriendly broken. And it all happens because of baptism. Baptism while the guy was unconscious, which in some respects is kind of a proof of the fact that baptism can bring grace even in a pre-volitional state. Augustine is shocked. He's hurt. He wants to ask him more questions about it, but before he has the opportunity to do so, the friend dies. And now Augustine is absolutely devastated. He says, I would walk around the streets and everything I saw reminded me of my friend. There's the coffee shop we used to hang out at. There's the movie theater we used to go to. Everything reminded him of his friend. And so he finds himself in a very bad situation. On the one hand, the death of his friend makes him tired of living. On the other hand, the death of his friend, who is about his age, mid-20s, young, healthy, and now suddenly dead, makes him very aware of the power of death. Death can take anyone. Youth is not spared. Anyone can die. And that really was driven home by the death of this close friend. And so Augustine says, I was tired of living and terrified of dying. That is a bad place to be in. Looking back on this episode of his life, Augustine asks, what went wrong? Why was it so devastating to me? Why did it put me into such a tailspin? And he comes to the conclusion that he loved his friend too much. Or to be more precise, he loved his friend in an excessive, disordered way. There's a great line in Book 4 of the Confessions. Blessed, O God, is the man who loves you, his friend in you, his enemy because of you. That is the proper ordering of love. Love the first truth, who is God, first, and then everything else accordingly. Love God first, love your friend in God, and then the love is so strong, you can even love your enemy because of God, which is not a normal thing to do, but that's how strong and overpowering the love of God is. And when you love your friend in God, notice what's happening. You are choosing the higher over the lower, which means you not only get the higher, you get the lower as well. When you love God first and your friend second, you not only get God, you get your friend. And if your friend dies, he has not died if he has died in God, but lives forever with God. So there's a way in which you have not even truly lost your friend when you love your friend in God. But if you love your friend instead of God, you are choosing the lower over the higher. You not only don't get the higher, you don't get God, but there's a way in which you don't fully get the lower as well, because all it takes is for your friend to die of some random fever, and poof, there goes all your happiness. You pinned all your hope on this one friend, and when he dies, it's over. Your chances for happiness have been dashed. That's the situation Augustine found himself in. That doesn't sound very nice. I should love God, more than I should love my friend. But that doesn't mean it's not true. Let me give you an example. In the United States today, the divorce rate is 50%. 50% of marriages fail. Now, I'm sure a lot of those marriages fail because the couple is not taking their marriage seriously enough. But I also wonder if, to some extent, at least with some couples, the problem is that they're taking their marriage too seriously. What I mean is this: when you love your spouse more than God, you are basically asking your spouse to become God for you. You're asking your spouse to be the source of happiness in your life. Have you ever thought that way? If only I could be married, find my soulmate, then I would be happy. It's a very understandable wish, but it is rather dangerous when you really think about it, because that means you're pinning all your hopes of happiness on one person. And no matter how wonderful that one person is, nobody can live up to that expectation. You're just setting yourself up for disappointment when you pin all of your hopes on one human being. If, on the other hand, you have a couple that loves God more than they love each other, doesn't sound terribly romantic, but paradoxically what happens is that they are able to be better lovers to each other, better lovers in the true sense of that word. because their love is grounded in a love that is higher than them. So, loving God more than your spouse creates a better marriage and makes better love. The last part of Book 4 is an unusual one because it's 7 years out of chronological sequence. Augustine is supposed to be around 26 at the time of Book 4, but he mentions something that happened to him when he was 19. He read Aristotle's Categories. Okay. What are Aristotle's Categories? They're part of his logical treatises. They are about categories of being, how we understand and categorize the reality around us. And they're very difficult. If you were to get a copy of Aristotle's Categories today, the editor will have added these elaborate diagrams to help you try to conceptualize what Aristotle is talking about. Well, it wasn't much different in Augustine's day. They didn't have permanent classrooms or whiteboards or chalkboards, so what would happen is a teacher would be surrounded by students. He would try to explain Aristotle's Categories, and he would draw elaborate diagrams in the dust to try to show what Aristotle was up to. Augustine was 19. He picks up, he says, Aristotle's Categories alone and unaided, reads it from cover to cover, and says, so, puts it down, he's got it perfect. Augustine was a genius. He was one of those rare minds that was utterly brilliant. But the purpose of telling this story was not to brag about how smart he was. On the contrary, because what does he do with his understanding of Aristotle's Categories? He says, in his arrogance, he went on to try to fit God into one of those categories, which incidentally, Aristotle himself says you shouldn't do in the opening chapter of the Categories. But Augustine was proud. There is a huge difference between being smart and being wise. There is a huge difference between having a high IQ and knowing how to use your IQ. There are lots of intellectually brilliant people in this world who are utter fools. And conversely, there are other people in this world who may not have the highest IQ, who are nevertheless wise. What's the difference? The difference is humility. Humility is absolutely essential to the proper use of your mind. Pride just gums up the works. Pride makes you think that you can just bank off your brilliance, think your way out of or into anything. And that's foolish thinking. So the point of this story is not to illustrate Augustine's brilliance, but to illustrate his pride and to show how dangerous a thing it is, not even morally, but also intellectually. Pride can keep us from becoming truly wise.